She was like the cool older sister that I always wanted to be. She was just everything to me. Yeah.
This was probably one of the most brutal crime scenes that I've attended in my 32 years of law enforcement.
Most of these type of crimes involve crimes of passion, the people that the victim is close with. So you look at relationships. When he started dating her, things started turning for the worse.
She wanted that picture-perfect family.
That was the fuel of her desire.
I wanted her out of the picture. These were two people that could have had a good life, but I think in their minds, they just thought, we can do whatever we want. We can, do this and get away with it. It's something I'm still processing, and probably something I'll still process for the rest of my life.
October 2nd, 2020. At 9 a.m., 911 dispatchers in Carrollton, Texas are flooded with calls about an active shooter outside a property management office.
My ambulance immediately. Someone came up and just shot my assistant manager. I need someone here immediately.
They didn't know what was happening. I can only imagine the fear that they were experiencing at that time.
I'm doing this interview in silhouette for my privacy and my workplace where I'm at. In the morning, I come in, 9 o'clock. Me and my leasing agent were just working. My coworker, Alyssa, was supposed to be here. Where is she at? I did notice a vehicle that was speeding. And I'm talking speeding really, really fast towards their front office. I'm thinking it was an upset resident maybe, but what didn't seem normal is he parked his car, opened up the door, then all we see is everything covered from his face to his mask to his gloves, everything all black. And that's when we actually see that he pulled up the gun. Me and my leasing agent looked at each other. I'm thinking it was just like a resident coming in to shoot us in the office. All I remember was like, hey, we're gonna die in this office. So I ran as fast as I can, grabbed the phone, told the police officers that there was somebody here with a gun. Then I was trying to figure out where to hide. And that's when we actually hear a gunshot going off.
I'm gonna get somebody that way. I need you to tell me some more information. Where is the shooter?
I don't have enough information. He's gone. He left in his car.
Okay, how long ago did he leave?
He literally left a second ago.
When she's sure the gunman is gone, Marie races outside to aid the victim.
I looked at her and I was like, this is Alyssa.
We learned pretty quickly that the victim was Alyssa Burkett.
She got stabbed more than probably 30 times. There was blood everywhere. She looked at me. I was like, what can I do? She looked at me. I go, come on. I go, you can make it. You can make it. She was spitting out more blood and everything. I go, please don't. I go, they'll be here any minute. They'll be here to save you. She just looked at me. She's like, don't worry. I guess she was just telling me that she wasn't there alone. So she took her last breath and she passed. And I grabbed my black sweater and covered her body. I didn't want anybody to have that image on the way she looked.
As law enforcement begins arriving on the scene, Alyssa's co-workers notify her family of the incident.
I got a call, actually from my dad, that Alyssa had been shot and she was dead. I was just in a state of shock, I think, that I realized, Alyssa is gone. She's never gonna be here again. You don't have that big sister in your life anymore that you look up to, you get advice to, everything, that she was gone.
Originally from Dallas, Alyssa Burkett was raised with 5 siblings in a loving home.
Alyssa was like the cool older sister that I always wanted to be. Like, she was always like goofing around, messing with me.
We lived in a different city, so she visited us and it was vacation for her and for us. She just lit up the room when she came in. She had so many friends as she grew older. She's trying to find herself, and she was interested in fashion and in modeling.
I always thought Alyssa was beautiful. She had like such good style. She would always have like really cool clothes that I would go and steal in her closet. I always saw her as like a role model for me. I looked up to her. She always told me to do good in the world, be a good person, like, because she was always helping others, doing what she could for others, even though she didn't have much.
After high school, Alyssa worked on her associate's degree and found steady employment.
She worked as a waitress for a while, but she really wanted to develop a career, and so she went into property management. In the fall of 2018, Alyssa came to us and said that she had met a man named Andrew at a bar, and there seemed to be an attraction there. So it seemed like their relationship went into high gear pretty quickly.
Alyssa's partner, Andrew Beard, grew up in a wealthy West Coast family.
He was from Northern California. I knew he was in a professional job and worked in management. And I also knew that he had an airplane and had property. He was older than Alyssa. He was in his 30s. And it appeared that he had a great life going on.
Alyssa actually texted me that she was pregnant. I was just like, wow. Like, I didn't expect it. I said, well, what are you gonna do? And she said, I don't know, but I'm gonna figure it out.
Andrew was happy when he found out on Alyssa's birthday, December 31st of 2018, he bought her a house. And it was on Lake Ray Hubbard in Rowlett. And that's a very small town atmosphere that is east of the Dallas area. Nice house, view of the lake, and that's where they were going to raise their daughter together.
Me and my grandmother went there, and we were there, and Andrew gave us the tour, and he showed us all the amenities the house had, and the nice backyard and balcony, and all the things that Andrew wanted to do to the house.
Alyssa was excited about motherhood, but as the months rolled by, the young mother-to-be began to have second thoughts about her future with Andrew.
They got together so quickly, and then they started having problems in their relationship.
She expressed to me like she wasn't in love with Andrew anymore.
By the time Alyssa's daughter Willow was born in 2019, she and Andrew had broken up.
And Alyssa had to leave and get her own place.
Despite her busy schedule, Alyssa began dating again. In time, she met a new man named Ben.
I met him, and we kind of all hung out with a boyfriend of mine, like the four of us.
She also decided that she wanted to be a lawyer.
She would have been a very successful lawyer from the way that I see that she was as a friend, as a co-worker, as a mom. Unfortunately, this happened.
On October 2nd, 2020, the 24-year-old has been murdered outside her workplace.
This victim was shot in the face and stabbed multiple times.
This was probably one of the most brutal crime scenes that I've attended in my 32 years of law enforcement. When I arrived, I could smell the blood.
While officers issue an alert across the metropolitan area, homicide detectives begin speaking to witnesses.
The manager of the apartment complex saw that the victim had parked right in front of the office and the suspect had parked right next to the victim's vehicle. She saw the initial part of it. We were able to determine that the suspect vehicle, was probably a dark-colored SUV.
But I wasn't able to picture the license plate because he had it covered.
Some accounts said the suspect was a black male. Other accounts said the suspect was wearing a face covering or wore a disguise.
One of the witnesses stated that a male, approximately 6 foot, 170 pounds, wearing all dark clothing, with a beard had fled the scene. There was several accounts, but from the majority, we were able to ascertain that there was a black vehicle that had left the scene.
The third witness was across the street, and they saw the whole thing. He said he heard what sounded like tires exploding. And he looked up, he saw Alyssa was shot through the window with a .410 shotgun. She was alive after the first shot. She exited the car and tried to make it to safety inside the office. And the suspect caught up to the victim. He grabbed her and turned her around and was stabbing her back toward her body like this. There's a lot of violence. So that signals that this thing was personal.
We were looking for somebody that knew Alyssa. Whoever did this wanted Alyssa dead.
While processing Alyssa's vehicle, detectives discover an ominous clue under the car.
We found a tracking device on her vehicle. That was really another part of the puzzle of the investigation. Our unit worked a lot of stalking cases, and vehicle trackers was becoming more and more common. A lot of times, there's a family member or somebody close to the victim, especially when there's this much passion involved in it. So you look at relationships.
Coming up, authorities revisit an alarming police report that sheds light on a possible suspect.
I go, you have to start watching your back. If he's capable of doing this to you, what more is he capable to do to you?
She was so stressed all the time. Her hair was falling out. She was looking around every corner.
And a twisted romance leads to a bitter and deadly dispute.
They put together a campaign of terror against her, and she felt it. Alyssa felt that.
In Carrollton, Texas, authorities are on the hunt for a masked gunman after Alyssa Burkett was murdered in broad daylight outside her office. And detectives have just discovered an ominous clue.
We found a GPS tracker that had been placed underneath her vehicle.
Most of these type of crimes involve crimes of passion, the people that the victim is close with, and we certainly had to explore that possibility.
Alyssa's co-workers tell detectives that she'd recently begun dating a man named Ben, but they don't know much about him or the couple's current status.
We had descriptions of the suspect vehicle being a dark pickup or a dark SUV. We learned Alyssa's boyfriend, he had a dark pickup truck.
Detectives contact Ben, who immediately agrees to meet with them.
He was scared, and he said he was not involved in this. He said he was at work. So one of the first things that we want to do is to check his alibi.
He ran a business out of his home, and we were able to establish that he was actually at home during the time of the murder through video surveillance at his home. He was quickly ruled out as a suspect.
I wasn't necessarily ready for it. So much pain to be able to feel that the sadness that he was feeling, for sure.
That's when Alyssa's boyfriend tells detectives about a recent incident at her place of work that he believes could be traced back to her ex, Andrew Beard.
About a month prior to this crime, we received a drug tip from an anonymous caller stating that Alyssa was dealing drugs out of the back of her vehicle right in front of the office.
This person claimed to live in the apartments, said that he was watching her deal drugs, and so the Carrollton police came out and investigated.
She was very cooperative. She gave consent to search the trunk of her car. Inside, they found a box that contained a pistol, some marijuana, I believe a little bit of cocaine, and some money that was planted there. The caller was very specific as to what was in the car, so it seemed kind of suspicious that this caller knew so much detail.
Alyssa had adamantly denied the drugs were hers.
If anybody knows how drug dealing goes, it's not a neat little box. in the trunk. And Alyssa didn't have any kind of reputation for any of this stuff. So what she said made sense to him. So he made a report on that incident, but didn't arrest Alyssa because there was obviously not something right going on there.
After a police officer left the office, I took my opportunity to ask her if everything was okay, and then she just started crying. She goes, "Do you remember that? The one I was telling you?" I go, "Yes, your psycho ex." "Yes, I do." She goes, "Well, guess what he did?" I was like, "What?" She goes, "He made an anonymous call and said that I was selling drugs." I'm like, "Are you sure?" She goes, "Yes, I'm 100% it was him." I go, "Well, all I can tell you is that now, from moving forward, you have to start watching your back. If he's capable of doing this to you, what more is he capable to do to you?"
Alyssa's boyfriend alleges that following Andrew and Alyssa's breakup, Andrew refused to let go.
When she was 7 or 8 months pregnant, he kicked her out of the house, put all her things on the curb, and got very upset, from what I understand, because she brought a friend over with a small child and they were making too much noise.
But then she said every place she went, he would turn up.
She did mention that Andrew was very controlling towards her. Like, if she wanted to go out with friends, he wanted to know where she was going, who she was with, and if he didn't like those people, he did not want her going.
She was so stressed all the time. Her hair was falling out. She was looking around every corner. Andrew knew she had a new boyfriend. He didn't want them being the caregivers for his child. And so Andrew became more and more aggressive with what he was doing and put a tracker on the baby, the car seat. She talked to her lawyer about a restraining order. There just wasn't enough evidence there to do it.
During my interview with Alyssa's boyfriend, he had expressed some concern that he was being stalked, that he was being tracked somehow, which was confirmed when we checked underneath his vehicle and found a similar tracker that was found under Alyssa's.
I was notified that Alyssa's mother was at the scene. She was upset, as one could only imagine. She told us the victim had been going through a child custody battle with the father of her child.
He did not want to pay child support, and he made that very clear.
Alyssa's mother believes Andrew planted drugs in her daughter's car to bolster his child custody case.
We learned that Andrew actually had his custody days, and he was in the possession of Willow at the time.
According to Alyssa's mom, Alyssa and Andrew had recently been in court regarding the child custody agreement, and it had gone in Alyssa's favor.
Andrew wanted full custody, and they decided on shared custody. The judge was siding with her. We were happy, but she was even more worried. Alyssa was saying, "Andrew's gonna murder me."
At that point, we quickly zeroed in on Andrew Beard as being the prime suspect.
Just hours into the murder investigation of Alyssa Burkett, detectives believe Alyssa's ex-boyfriend, Andrew Beard, has killed her over custody of their 15-month-old daughter. By mid-morning that day, authorities send a surveillance team to Andrew's home 30 miles away in Rolett.
We don't have a search warrant, but we can secure the house and make sure that any evidence isn't destroyed.
Officers start watching the house and see Andrew with a woman and Willow entering the truck. They looked like they were loading some bags, and it appeared as though they were leaving the home.
As the truck pulls away, authorities spot an opportunity.
In Texas, vehicles must have 2 license plates on the vehicle, one in the rear and then one in the front. Andrew Beard did not have that front license plate, which gave us probable cause to make a traffic stop on the vehicle. They were stopped in a white Ford F-150, but the suspect vehicle that we were looking for was a black SUV.
Andrew Beard, as far as we knew, didn't own any vehicles that matched the suspect vehicle.
He was identified as well as his fiancee, who was in the vehicle with him, and that was Holly Elkins.
They seemed nonchalant, like, why are you stopping us?
Detectives don't reveal anything about the murder and instead tell Andrew that they're investigating his child custody case with Alyssa Burkett.
And Andrew said, she's always trying to strum up things that about me. So I'm sure it's something untruthful that she sent you over here for. So they were nonchalant and acting like nothing had occurred.
The whole interaction was really low-key. We didn't want to alert him to the fact that we were onto him, but told them that we wanted to talk to them at the station, which is the reason they agreed to come to the police department.
We secured the pickup truck. We told them that we weren't going to allow them to go back into the residence at that point in time. So they called an Uber. They were going to meet us at the police department for questioning.
While waiting for a warrant to search the house, investigators canvassed the neighborhood in order to learn more about Andrew Beard.
We ended up meeting the neighbors next to his house. They said, this guy's a great guy.
He did seem to be a really good dad. I mean, he literally carried the what do you call it, that hammock. He would put it in front and carry the baby around with him, and you don't normally see men do this. He did seem to really take care of her.
Neighbors say that after Andrew and Alyssa broke up, he was determined to move on.
He had a lot of women coming through his home. It was a revolving door.
Andrew and Holly met late March, early April, and within 6 months, they were engaged. He was head over heels for Holly.
Holly looked like a tall Barbie doll. She wore a lot of makeup. She dressed to perfection.
Born in 1990, Holly Elkins grew up outside Detroit, Michigan. After college, Holly built a prosperous career in Texas.
Holly was 21 when we met, and she was already doing pretty high-end sales for different technology companies at that age. She was very outgoing, very social, got along with everybody, kind of life of the party kind of girl, and she was always a good time.
To look at Holly, you would think that she was the little, sweet, innocent girl, but Holly seemed very bossy. And when she talked to Andrew, you knew who wore the pants.
Andrew and Holly fell hard for one another. Holly was especially taken with Andrew's young daughter.
It seemed like she cared about that child so much.
She was always ready to get married, settle down, start having babies. She was a very family-oriented woman.
When detectives returned to the station to question Holly and Andrew, they realized the couple never showed up.
Their lawyer apparently told them that we would make an appointment later because the lawyer wasn't available at that point in time. We were working on search warrants on the vehicle, on phones, and on the residence. Obviously, our first thing is the residence. We want to get in there.
At 7:30 p.m. that night, a judge signs off on the search warrants.
We're in the house. We find trackers identical to the trackers that we found on Alyssa's vehicle and on Alyssa's boyfriend's vehicle. We also found, which was very interesting, a script for that drug complaint that was called in a month before, alleging that Alyssa was dealing drugs in front of the apartment complex.
It had Alyssa's license plate. It had make and color of her car. It had the Carrollton Police Department beat phone number.
We also found a .22 revolver pistol with what seemed to be a homemade silencer attached to it in the garage.
During the search of the house, we were able to locate several firearms and knives that were in the residence. Unfortunately, none of them appeared to be the murder weapon from what shot Alyssa or what was used to stab her.
So we get a search warrant for Andrew Beard's vehicle, and in the pickup truck was a diaper bag for the baby. And inside the diaper bag was some burned items. It looked like makeup wipes that had dark colored makeup on it. They had a makeup brush that the bristles had burned, but the handle was still intact. They also had jars of dark complected makeup that was in the bag as well. The description of the suspect, some people described this suspect as a black male. So we started thinking that he had actually disguised himself as a black male to complete this offense. We had an affirmative link to Andrew in this case.
Coming up, authorities continue building their case against their primary suspect and discover a plot born of obsession.
She wanted that picture-perfect family.
He was going to make doubly sure that he wasn't a failure.
Texas authorities have uncovered a trove of evidence that Andrew Beard murdered his ex-girlfriend, Alyssa Burkett, over custody of their daughter. As detectives continue canvassing Andrew's neighborhood, they hit pay dirt.
On the other side, in front of his house, was another neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, we found a dark SUV. It had plastic taped up around the back windows, like black plastic bags that were taped up to block the windows. The passenger seat was all the way down, so it was set up as a surveillance vehicle. Now we just have to tie that car to Andrew Beard. We found out where it was purchased based upon the registered owner of the vehicle. We contacted that registered owner, and that registered owner said that, yeah, Andrew Beard came by, paid cash for this car, and left with it.
The vehicle is impounded and immediately processed for evidence.
We could see what appeared to be a blood smear on the steering wheel, and there looked like there was a face covering or a fake beard that was on the corner of the seat.
At this point in the investigation, we believe that Andrew Beard used makeup and a fake beard to make him look like an African-American man.
So we now have probable cause to arrest him for this offense.
On October 5th, 3 days after the murder, police arrest Andrew outside his home.
There was no reaction from him. There was no look of surprise when he was arrested.
I would never dream in a million years that Andrew Beard would be capable of such a thing. I was like, are you serious? It was crazy.
When he was caught, it was a relief. Justice will come to him.
He quickly let the officers know that he wanted to speak with an attorney. So from that point on, I was speaking with Andrew Beard's attorneys.
When police question Andrew's fiancée, Holly Elkins, she insists they have arrested the wrong man.
We ended up talking to her. She was free to leave, but she still kept talking. Holly claimed that they were home all along together when the murder took place.
In late October, Andrew was released on a $1 million bond.
He got out of jail on an attorney's bond.
That concerned us because of the brutal nature of this crime. We were concerned not only for Willow, we were also concerned about Alyssa's family.
We got the word that he was out. We were in shock. We were dismayed. And to be honest, a lot of our family members at that point were arming themselves.
And now Alyssa's mother has the baby, so now they have a murderer that's free from custody. She's worried about her own safety. So that's when we filed the case on the gun, the .22 with the silencer that we had found in the garage. The silencer appeared to be homemade, didn't have a serial number. That is a federal offense. So we put him back in jail on that gun charge.
I'll, never forget how the judge looked at him and said, "Mr. Beard, I'm denying your bail." And so there was a collective sigh of relief from our family.
When authorities receive the findings from the crime lab, the case against Andrew is solidified.
The blood found on the steering wheel matched Alyssa. We found the fake beard that Andrew used during the offense had his DNA. So the vehicle was the nail in the case.
Well, there were several hearings in the 2+ years that he was awaiting his trial. Right before the trial happened, we got a call saying, "You need to be in court today. There's a special hearing." We found out that he was pleading guilty. And so it was a bit of a surprise. We thought he would fight it the whole way.
On June 22, 2022, Andrew pleads guilty to 2 violent federal crimes, including cyberstalking resulting in death.
It was a good thing because he admitted his guilt.
I thought Andrew was a narcissist. I truly did. And I did think he was a psychopath.
One of the conditions of the plea is that he gives a proffer, which is basically just, I'm going to tell you everything that happened.
Following the hearing, Andrew sits down with federal investigators and opens up for the first time about the crime's true mastermind.
It was apparent that he was ready to tell Holly's involvement. He quickly pointed the finger at her.
In June of 2022, Andrew Beard has implicated his fiancée, Holly Elkins, in the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Alyssa Burkett.
Beard told us that things were going pretty good with him and Alyssa. As custody situations go, they were getting along. But when he started dating Holly, things started turning for the worst.
She wanted to be the mother of Willow. She wanted that picture-perfect family.
So Holly, according to Andrew, had it in her mind that Alyssa didn't need to be in the picture anymore. According to Andrew, they needed to up the ante, be more aggressive in the custody battle. So they started trying to prove that Alyssa was unfit.
They put together a campaign of terror against her, and she felt it. Alyssa felt that.
But first it started out just trying to find dirt. And then it escalated into, well, we need to put trackers on Ben's car, put trackers on Alyssa's car. Those kind of things that we had to do for the custody battle. And then it developed into, she needs to be murdered. It was very shocking as he went on and described how important or how fixated Holly had become on him murdering Alyssa.
He had been to the apartment complex a number of times over the previous several months to surveil Alyssa as she arrived. Andrew told us that on those practice runs, his purpose was to kill her. And he told us that he just couldn't bring himself to do it. And that every time he told Holly that he couldn't do it, Holly would berate him and make him feel smaller and less of a man.
Andrew told us Holly kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And it became important to him to please Holly. And so he made up his mind that he wasn't going to go back to Holly again and say, look, I couldn't do it. I think that's why it was so violent, because he was going to make doubly sure that he wasn't a failure for Holly.
Andrew tells authorities he realized he needed to come clean when he found out Holly had moved to Miami and gotten married 1 year after his arrest.
So a lot of time had passed, and Andrew was in prison. Holly had moved on with her life. Andrew, he was up against a wall, and in order to save himself, he was going to do what it took to make himself look a little better. I didn't see a lot of remorse during the interview with Andrew. It seemed to me like he needed to get his facts out to us.
Following Andrew's interview, detectives secure a search warrant for Holly's phone records and confirm she had been putting pressure on Andrew in the months before the murder.
Several of those text messages were very aggressive, from Holly to Andrew, about how he's weak, about how he lets his baby mama run over him.
They were written in a sense that Holly was pushing him toward the end goal, which was to get rid of Alyssa.
Detectives also use Holly's phone records to track her movements in the days leading up to the murder.
We were able to uncover several specific instances where things that were bought for the commission of the murder.
On September 10th, Holly and Andrew purchased at a sporting goods store the clothing that Andrew wore during the commission of the murder. Within days of that, Holly purchased some dark-colored makeup at another store, and within days of that, Holly and Andrew purchased the ammunition and the Camillus knife that was used during the murder.
On May 24, 2023, a federal judge sentences Andrew Beard to 43 years in prison. 1 month later, authorities issue an arrest warrant for Holly Elkins and discover the 32-year-old is currently at the Miami airport, getting ready to leave the country.
Holly had been indicted by the Assistant U.S. Attorney's Office, and she was traveling to the Dominican Republic. Holly thought that she had probably gotten away with this. She was living her life like she was gonna just not have to answer for what she did.
In July of 2023, almost 3 years after Alyssa Burkett's murder, authorities race to a Miami airport, hoping to catch Holly Elkins before she boards a flight out of the country. Fortunately, federal authorities catch up with Holly before takeoff.
I got a call from the DOJ saying Holly Elkins is under arrest. She's at the Miami airport right now, and we've just arrested her for the same charges we had on Andrew Beard. They had a bond hearing for her, and she was held. They would not release her, which I was glad that they held her.
In April 2024, Holly's case goes to trial.
I saw Holly in court. She had no tears on her face. Nothing, like no regrets on her at all. Just really cold on her expression.
The government's star witness is an FBI agent specializing in digital evidence. She details the phone records and purchases that link Holly to the crime.
The prosecution showed quite a bit of evidence that they had in text messages between Andrew and Holly. And that really opened my eyes of this was a whole deeper level.
And it was obvious she wanted Alyssa's baby. That was the fuel of her desire. And what motivated her, she wanted her baby. Holly would refer to the baby as my Willow, my baby, she, within a couple of weeks of meeting Andrew, she was doing this. She reached out to Alyssa one day and said, hey, let's be friends. In the meantime, she was behind the scenes saying things like she just absolutely hated her guts.
Prosecutors say Holly's obsession fueled the custody fight that ensued, and she repeatedly goaded Andrew to act.
She wanted her out of the picture so that her and Andrew could start their family. There is a very disturbing video that they showed in court of Holly videotaping Willow. At the time, her mother is being murdered and asking, Willow, what's going on today? Holly knows that her mother is being murdered, and she's asking this question to this baby. It was very disturbing.
I think it all comes back to the entitlement of both of them. Andrew grew up with money. He wasn't poor. Neither was Holly. They grew up with that entitlement. They grew up as the world revolves around me, and we can get away with anything that we do.
On April 17th, 2024, jurors retire to deliberate Holly's fate. It takes them under 2 hours to deliver a guilty verdict.
She didn't show any emotion when the guilty verdict was read, and they took her out. But it didn't surprise me. She never has had any emotion from the start of this.
It was bittersweet. When you're in such profound grief, it's not like you think of retribution at that point, but it was the right thing to happen.
We came to know Alyssa's whole family, and we all wanted to get it right for them. And it was important to us because we were their voice.
We actually finally have justice for Alyssa. So now I can see that she's in peace.
This memory of her, it just hits you in a wave, and you feel the pain. Like, it's a pain that never goes away, and that I carry around to this day.
Alyssa not being there, it's almost like the sun was just blocked out, because that's really what she represented to all of us, is just a bright light in the family.
There was nothing remarkable about the car at first glance. Parked near a quiet area by Melbourne Park, it sat in stillness, as if it had simply been left there for a short while, forgotten, perhaps, or abandoned in haste. Days had passed since anyone had last seen the woman who owned it. By the time police approached, the vehicle had already become something more than just a missing person's clue. It had become the center of a growing unease. A silent object holding answers no one was prepared to confront. Officers moved carefully, aware that what they were about to uncover could shift the entire direction of the case. There had been no signs of forced entry reported earlier, no immediate evidence of violence at the woman's home, and yet something felt deeply wrong. The longer the car had remained undiscovered, the more that feeling intensified. An intuition that whatever had happened was not sudden, not clean, and not merciful. When they reached the vehicle, there was a pause. Not a formal one, not spoken, but understood. A hesitation that comes from experience, from knowing that certain moments divide an investigation into before and after. One officer moved toward the rear of the car, the trunk. It was a routine step in procedure, but nothing about this case felt routine anymore. The latch was released, and then everything changed. Inside, in the confined darkness of the trunk, was a human body. A woman, folded into a space far too small for the natural shape of a living person. Her limbs constrained by the limits of metal and air that had long since run thin. The conditions were immediately apparent. The space was sealed, the oxygen depleted, the environment hostile to survival in every possible way. And yet, she was still alive. Barely. Her skin showed the unmistakable signs of prolonged distress, discoloration, dehydration, the physical toll of being trapped without relief for days. Time had not stopped for her inside that trunk. It had stretched, slowed, and pressed inward, turning each passing hour into something heavier, more punishing than the last. The human body is not meant to endure that kind of confinement, not meant to fight for breath in a space designed to hold objects, not people. The officers at the scene were confronted with a reality that was difficult to process in real time. This was not a case of a body discovered after the fact. This was something far more disturbing, a life suspended at the edge of death. The result of deliberate action. There was no ambiguity in what had been done. Whoever placed her there had not intended for her to be found quickly. There were no signs of an attempt to conceal and then return. No indication of panic or reversal. The placement of the car, the condition of the victim, the passage of time, all pointed to a single, chilling conclusion. She had been left there to die. Not instantly, not with any measure of immediacy, but slowly, over hours that turned into days. The difference matters. It speaks to intent, to the nature of the act itself. This was not just violence. It was abandonment in its most extreme form. As emergency responders worked to remove her from the trunk, the urgency shifted. The investigation was no longer solely about finding a missing person. It was now about understanding how she had come so close to death without crossing that final threshold. She was transported for medical care, but even in those first moments, the damage was evident. The lack of oxygen, the prolonged exposure, the physical trauma, all of it had already taken a profound toll. The body can only compensate for so long before systems begin to fail, and in her case, that limit had been pushed beyond what most would survive. But she had. Somehow, she had endured long enough to be found. That fact alone raised questions that would define everything that followed. Because survival, in this context, did not mean recovery. It did not mean resolution. It meant something far more complicated. It meant that the story was not over. It meant that there would be a window, however small, through which investigators could attempt to reconstruct what had happened. And it meant that whoever was responsible had not achieved the outcome they had intended. In the days leading up to this discovery, the case had already begun to form its early outlines. A woman missing under unusual circumstances. A husband whose behavior did not align with expectation. Details that did not quite fit together, even before the car was found. But the moment the trunk was opened, those fragments began to align in a way that pointed towards something deliberate, something planned. This was not a random act. It was not opportunistic. It carried the hallmarks of forethought, of decisions made in advance and carried out with a specific goal in mind. The question was no longer just what happened. It was who had reason to want this outcome and how far they were willing to go to achieve it. The answers would lead investigators into a situation defined not only by violence, but by betrayal, one that unfolded not between strangers, but within the boundaries of a family. Before the discovery, there had still been space for uncertainty, for the possibility that Maria Korp had simply vanished under unexplained circumstances. Afterward, that possibility no longer existed. The evidence in the trunk was too clear, too undeniable. She had not disappeared. She had been placed there, and someone had walked away, leaving her behind in darkness, in silence, in a space where time became something to endure rather than measure. The reality of that act would come to define the case, shaping every stage of the investigation that followed. Because in the end, what made this moment so difficult to comprehend was not just the violence itself, but the duration of it, the knowledge that for days, while the world continued as normal, she remained there, alive, waiting for something that did not come. Not help, not rescue, not even the certainty of an end. Just time. Before the car, before the investigation, before the questions that would ripple outward and draw in a nation's attention. There was a life that moved with quiet consistency. Maria Korp was 50 years old, a woman of Portuguese heritage living in Melbourne, and by all accounts contained within the available facts. She occupied a role that was both familiar and deeply rooted in responsibility. She was a mother. That detail, simple on its surface, carried weight in the structure of her daily life. It implied routine, obligation, and a sense of continuity, days shaped not by unpredictability, but by repetition and care. There's a particular rhythm to that kind of life, one that rarely draws attention because it functions as it is meant to. Maria's world, as far as can be established, followed that rhythm. Nothing in the known details suggests a pattern of sudden departures or unexplained absences. Her disappearance would later stand in sharp contrast to the stability that defined her. To understand what was lost, It is necessary to remain grounded in what is known. Without embellishment, Maria lived in a household with her husband, Joe Corp. Their marriage formed the central structure of the family unit, at least in appearance. Joe worked in the transport industry, a job that likely involved schedules, logistics, and movement, elements that exist outside the home but ultimately return to it. There is no indication in the provided data of open conflict visible from the outside. No documented escalation that would have signaled what was unfolding beneath the surface. And yet, the absence of visible disruption does not equate to the absence of tension. What is known is that Joe Corp was engaged in a long-term extramarital relationship with a woman named Tanya Herman. She was not a distant or abstract figure in his life. She was a colleague, someone within his professional orbit, someone accessible, present, and integrated into his day-to-day environment. Over time, that connection shifted into an affair, one that remained hidden from Maria. The nature of secrecy is that it creates parallel realities. In one, there is the visible structure, the home, the marriage, the routine. In the other, there is concealment, private conversations, concealed intentions, and decisions are not shared with all parties involved. In this case, those two realities existed simultaneously, moving forward without intersecting in a way that would expose the truth, at least not immediately. The relationship between Joe and Tanya was not brief or incidental. It was sustained over time, and with that duration came the development of intent. According to the established facts, the two of them reached a point where they wanted Maria removed from the equation. That phrase, removed, is clinical in its wording, but its implications are severe. It suggests not just dissatisfaction or desire for change, but a decision to act in a way that would permanently alter the structure of a family. It is important not to project beyond what is known. The data does not provide insight into private conversations, emotional justifications, or internal reasoning. What it establishes clearly is the existence of motive. Joe and Tanya wanted to be together, and Maria's presence stood in the way of that outcome. Within the context of the case, this forms the foundation upon which everything else is built. Maria, meanwhile, continued within the framework of her normal life. There is no indication that she anticipated what was coming. No evidence of preparation for departure. No suggestion that she had withdrawn or altered her routine in a way that would signal awareness of danger. Her life, as far as can be determined, remained consistent up until the day she disappeared. This contrast, the stability of her routine against the concealed intentions of those around her, is central to understanding the emotional weight of the case. It is not simply that a crime occurred. It is that it occurred within a structure that, from the outside, appeared intact. The dynamic between the three individuals, Maria, Joe, and Tanya, was not one of open conflict. It was asymmetrical. Two people shared knowledge and intent. One did not. That imbalance is critical. It meant that decisions were being made about Maria's life without her awareness, without her participation, and ultimately without her ability to respond. In many cases, the build-up to a crime includes visible fractures, arguments, separations, escalating disputes. Here, based on the provided information, those fractures are not documented. Instead, what exists is concealment, duration, and the gradual solidification of a plan. The setting, Melbourne, serves as the backdrop, but it does not define the events. This is not a case shaped by location in a way that alters its meaning. It is shaped by relationships, by proximity, and by the choices made within a confined social circle. The home, the workplace, the shared spaces of daily life. These are the environments in which the relevant interactions occurred. And within those environments, the division formed between what was visible and what was hidden. Maria's role as a mother reinforces the sense of continuity that was disrupted. It underscores the reality that her disappearance was not just an isolated event affecting one individual, but something that extended outward into a family structure. The provided data does not elaborate on the children, and so it is necessary to remain within that boundary. But the presence of that role is enough to indicate that the impact of what followed would not be contained. As the timeline approaches February 9th, 2005, there is no documented deviation from normalcy. No indication that Maria's routine was different that morning. She left home as she always did. That detail matters because it anchors the narrative in predictability. It establishes a baseline from which the deviation, the disappearance, becomes more pronounced. In contrast, Joe and Tanya were already operating within a different framework, one defined by secrecy and intent. Their actions, when they occur, do not emerge from a sudden impulse captured in the moment. They are the result of a progression that had been developing over time. The convergence of these two trajectories, Maria's routine and their plan, creates the conditions for what happens next. There is no need to impose additional interpretation onto that convergence. The facts themselves are sufficient. A woman living a consistent, structured life. A husband engaged in a concealed affair. A third party directly connected to both the personal and professional sphere of that husband. And a shared intention between two individuals to remove the third from the equation. That is the background. That is the context in which the events of February 9th unfold. And it is from that context that the case moves from the realm of private decisions into the irreversible reality of action. On the morning of February 9th, 2005, nothing outwardly marked the day as different. There were no reported disruptions, no indications that routine had been altered or that anything unusual was about to occur. Maria Korp left her home as she normally would. That detail, simple and unremarkable on its own, becomes critical in retrospect because it establishes a clear starting point, one grounded in normalcy. There was no sign of hesitation, no indication that she anticipated danger, and no evidence to suggest that she was leaving under anything other than ordinary circumstances. At some point after she left, that normal sequence of events was interrupted. The available facts do not specify the exact time or duration between her departure and the moment the attack occurred. But what is known is where it happened, the garage of her home. This is significant not only because it is a private space, but because it represents a location where Maria would have had no reason to expect a threat. It was a place tied to daily routine, to arrival and departure, not to confrontation. Within that space, Tanya Herman was waiting. The act of waiting implies preparation. It indicates that the timing was deliberate, that the moment had been anticipated rather than improvised. When Maria entered the garage, she was not aware that someone else was present. The encounter was not mutual. It was not a situation that allowed for reaction or defense in advance. According to the established facts, Tanya attacked from behind, using a strap or belt to strangle her. The method is important. It is direct, physical, and requires proximity. It also relies on surprise. From behind, the ability to resist is immediately compromised. The attack was not designed to create a struggle that would draw attention. It was designed to incapacitate quickly. Maria lost consciousness. At that point, the situation transitioned from assault to control. Once unconscious, she was no longer able to resist or respond. What followed was a sequence of actions that required both physical effort and decision-making. Her body was moved, placed into the trunk of her own car. The trunk is not a space designed for human occupancy. It is enclosed, restrictive, and isolated from external visibility. Placing someone inside, it is not incidental. It is an act that removes them from immediate detection and confines them in an environment where survival is limited by design. The trunk was then closed. At that moment, the conditions necessary for what followed were established. The car itself became the container of the crime. After Maria was placed inside, the vehicle was driven away from the home and eventually left in a location near a park in Melbourne. The choice of location, while not elaborated upon in the available data, is relevant in that it created distance from the point of attack. It placed the vehicle in a public area where it might blend into its surroundings, reducing the likelihood of immediate discovery. Once the car was abandoned, the sequence of events shifted again from active violence to passive outcome. No further action was taken to ensure Maria's death in a direct sense. Instead, she was left inside the trunk, confined without access to air, water, or assistance. The intention, as supported by the facts, was that she would die there. This is a critical aspect of the case. The method was not immediate. It relied on time. It relied on the body's inability to sustain itself under those conditions. It is the difference between an act that ends life quickly and one that allows suffering to extend over hours and days. What occurred inside that trunk cannot be reconstructed in detail beyond what the physical evidence later revealed. But certain conditions are inherent to the environment. The space would have been dark, with no external light source. Airflow would have been minimal, decreasing over time as oxygen was consumed. The temperature would have fluctuated depending on external conditions. But within the enclosed space, it would have contributed to physical stress. Dehydration would begin quickly. Without water, the body's systems begin to fail. Without adequate oxygen, the brain is affected. These are not immediate processes, but they are inevitable under sustained confinement. Maria did not die immediately. That fact is established by her condition when she was eventually discovered. She remained alive for several days within the trunk. This introduces a dimension to the case that extends beyond the initial act of violence. It transforms the incident into a prolonged event, one in which time itself becomes a factor. Each hour that passed represented continued exposure to conditions that the human body is not equipped to endure. Meanwhile, outside the vehicle, life continued without interruption. The car remained parked. People passed by. The environment moved forward as it always does. There was no outward indication that inside the trunk, a person was still alive. This separation between what is visible and what is hidden is central to understanding the nature of the incident. The act itself had already been completed, the attack, the placement in the trunk, the abandonment of the vehicle. What followed required no further input from those responsible. It was a process set in motion, one that depended entirely on the absence of intervention. During this time, Maria was reported missing. The lack of contact, the absence of her vehicle, and the deviation from her routine prompted concern. A missing person case began to take shape. At that stage, there was still uncertainty. Possibilities remained open. The full extent of what had occurred was not yet known. The investigation was operating without the critical piece of information that would later redefine everything, the location of the car, and the condition of the person inside it. For 4 days, the situation remained unresolved. The timeline is important. It establishes the duration of confinement, the length of time during which Maria remained inside the trunk. It also underscores the delay between the act and its discovery. That delay is not incidental. It is part of the structure of the crime. The intention was not immediate discovery. It was the opposite. By the time the car was found on February 13th, the incident had already unfolded to its fullest extent. The physical consequences were already in place. The deprivation of oxygen, the lack of water, the sustained confinement, all of it had accumulated. When the trunk was opened, what investigators encountered was not the beginning of the incident, but its result. Maria was still alive, but the damage had been done. The transition from incident to investigation occurred at that moment. But the incident itself, everything that had been set in motion on February 9th, was complete. It began with a routine departure, moved through a concealed attack in a private space. and culminated in days of isolation inside a locked trunk. There were no interruptions, no interventions, and no reversals. Only the eventual discovery, which came too late to prevent the outcome that had already been determined by the conditions she had been left to endure. By the time Maria Korp was discovered on February 13, 2005, the case had already shifted beyond the uncertainty of a missing person investigation. What remained was the task of understanding how she had come to be inside the trunk of her own car, still alive after days of confinement, and who was responsible for placing her there. The transition from search to investigation was immediate and definitive. The condition in which she was found did not leave room for alternative explanations. This was not an accident. It was the result of deliberate human action. The first layer of the investigation focused on the physical evidence and the immediate circumstances surrounding the discovery. The vehicle had been located in a public area near a park in Melbourne, a place where it could remain for an extended period without drawing attention. There were no indications that the car had been moved frequently or revisited. Its placement suggested a single decision followed by abandonment. Inside the trunk, the environment itself told part of the story. The lack of ventilation, the confined space, and the absence of any provisions made it clear that whoever placed Maria there had not intended for her to survive. At the same time, the fact that she was still alive introduced urgency into every subsequent step. She was transported to a hospital, where medical professionals began assessing the extent of her injuries. The findings were severe. Prolonged oxygen deprivation had caused significant brain damage. Dehydration and physical trauma compounded the situation. She was placed into a state of deep unconsciousness, and as her condition stabilized, it became evident that she had entered a vegetative state. The medical assessment did more than define her prognosis. It established a timeline. The injuries were consistent with extended confinement over multiple days. This aligned with the gap between her disappearance on February 9th and her discovery on February 13th. The medical evidence, therefore, reinforced the sequence of events rather than contradicting it. While medical teams worked to sustain her life, investigators turned their attention to reconstructing the events that led to her condition. In cases of violent crime, the starting point often lies in the victim's immediate environment. Maria's home, her routine, and her relationships became central to the inquiry. There had been no signs of forced entry at her residence, no indication of a struggle that extended beyond a contained area. This suggested that the attack had occurred in a location where the assailant could operate without interruption. The garage, identified in the established facts as the site of the assault, fit that description. It was a controlled space, shielded from public view, and directly connected to Maria's routine movements. From there, the focus expanded to the individuals closest to her. In many investigations, statistical probability and practical reasoning converge on a similar point. Those within the immediate circle of the victim often possess the greatest opportunity and, in some cases, the strongest motives. Joe Korp, as Maria's husband, was naturally among the first to be questioned in detail. His behavior had already drawn attention in the early stages of the case. Reports indicated that he appeared unusually calm given the circumstances, and his statements contained inconsistencies. In isolation, such factors might not be conclusive, but within the broader context of a violent crime, they became significant. Investigators examined his timeline, his account of events, and any discrepancies that could not be reconciled. As this process unfolded, another critical element emerged: his relationship with Tanya Herman. What began as an inquiry into personal connections quickly developed into a central line of investigation. The existence of an affair introduced a potential motive, one that aligned with the nature of the crime. The relationship was not incidental. It was ongoing, concealed, and directly relevant to the structure of Maria's family life. establishing the existence of the affair was not, in itself, sufficient to determine involvement in a violent act. However, it provided a framework within which further evidence could be interpreted. The next step was to examine the roles each individual may have played. According to the established facts, Tanya Herman was identified as the person who carried out the physical attack. This conclusion was not reached through assumption, but through the accumulation of investigative findings. The method of the assault, strangulation from behind using a strap or belt, required proximity and direct action. It was not a remote or indirect form of violence. It required the assailant to be physically present at the moment of the attack. The garage setting, combined with the element of waiting, indicated that the act had been planned rather than spontaneous. This planning extended beyond the moment of assault. After Maria lost consciousness, she was placed into the trunk of her car, and the vehicle was relocated. These steps required coordination, time, and a clear objective. The decision to abandon the car in a public area further indicated an attempt to distance the crime from its origin point. As investigators pieced together these elements, the structure of the crime became more defined. It was not a single act, but a sequence: preparation, attack, confinement, relocation, and abandonment. Each step reinforced the conclusion that this was a coordinated effort. Within that framework, the roles attributed to Joe Korp and Tanya Herman became clearer. Tanya was identified as the direct perpetrator of the assault, while Joe's involvement was linked to planning and participation in the broader sequence of events. On February 16, 2005, both individuals were arrested. The timing of the arrests reflects the pace at which the investigation progressed following the discovery of the car. Within 3 days, investigators had moved from locating the victim to identifying and detaining the primary suspects. The charges brought against them were attempted murder and causing serious injury. These charges were consistent with the legal status of the case at that time. Maria was still alive, and while her condition was critical, the outcome had not yet been finalized. This introduced a layer of complexity into the legal proceedings. The intent behind the actions was clear from the circumstances, but the legal classification depended on the victim's status. The investigation, therefore, operated in a space where the facts of the crime were severe, but the legal outcome remained in flux. As the case developed, this tension persisted. Maria's condition did not improve. Medical assessments indicated that recovery was not expected. She remained in a vegetative state, sustained by medical intervention, but without consciousness. This prolonged state extended the timeline of the case beyond the initial incident and arrests. It also introduced ethical and legal considerations that would later influence the direction of the proceedings. For investigators, however, the primary objective remained the same: to establish a clear, evidence-based account of what had occurred. By the time the arrests were made, the core elements of that account were in place. Maria had been attacked in her garage, rendered unconscious, placed in the trunk of her car, and left for days in conditions that nearly resulted in her death. The individuals responsible had been identified, their relationship established, and their roles within the sequence of events defined. What remained was the process of bringing those findings into the legal system, where they would be examined, challenged, and ultimately judged. The investigation had reached its turning point. The unknown had become known, and the focus shifted from discovery to accountability. By the time the case moved into the legal system, its central facts had already been established through investigation. Maria Korp had been attacked, confined inside the trunk of her own car, and left there for days under conditions that caused severe and irreversible harm. Those responsible had been identified, arrested, and formally charged. Yet the transition from investigation to trial did not simplify the case. Instead, it introduced a different kind of complexity, one shaped not only by what had happened, but by what had not yet concluded. Maria was still alive. Her condition, however, was defined by permanence. Medical assessments confirmed that she had suffered extensive brain damage due to prolonged oxygen deprivation. She was in a vegetative state, without awareness, without the capacity for recovery, and entirely dependent on life-sustaining medical intervention. This created a legal situation that was both clear and uncertain at the same time. The intent behind the actions taken against her was evident from the circumstances. The method of attack, the confinement, and the abandonment all pointed toward an outcome that, under ordinary conditions, would have resulted in death. And yet, because Maria had not died, the charges initially brought against those responsible were framed accordingly. Attempted murder and causing serious injury. The distinction mattered within the legal framework. It defined the parameters of the case, the structure of the arguments, and the potential consequences. At the center of the proceedings were two individuals whose roles had been delineated during the investigation: Tanya Herman and Joe Korp. Their paths through the legal system, however, diverged in significant ways. Tanya Herman chose to plead guilty. This decision removed the need for a prolonged trial in her case and established, in legal terms, her direct responsibility for the attack. The act itself, waiting in the garage, approaching from behind, using a strap or belt to strangle Maria, was not contested. By entering a guilty plea, Tanya acknowledged her role in carrying out the assault that set the entire sequence of events into motion. The court, in turn, moved to sentencing. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison. That sentence reflected the severity of the crime as it stood within the legal classification at the time. An attempted killing that resulted in catastrophic, life-altering injury. Joe Korp's position was different. He did not admit guilt. He denied involvement and remained within the legal process, awaiting trial. His case, therefore, retained all the elements of uncertainty that accompany a contested prosecution. The burden remained on the legal system to present evidence, establish his role, and determine his responsibility beyond reasonable doubt. At this stage, the case existed in a suspended state. One perpetrator had been sentenced. The other had not yet been judged. And the victim remained alive, though without the possibility of recovery. It was within this context that a separate, deeply consequential decision emerged, one that would shift the trajectory of the case in a way that extended beyond the courtroom. In July 2005, several months after Maria had been discovered and hospitalized, a legal guardian authority made the decision to withdraw artificial nutrition and life support. This was not a decision made within the criminal trial itself, but it had profound implications for the case as a whole. The reasoning was grounded in medical reality. Maria's condition had not improved. There was no expectation of recovery, no indication that she would regain consciousness or any form of independent function. The continuation of life-sustaining treatment would not alter that outcome. And so, the decision was made to discontinue it. This action, while medically and legally supported within its own framework, generated significant public debate. It raised questions that extended beyond the specifics of the case in a broader ethical territory. On one side, the decision was viewed as an act of compassion, a recognition that continuing treatment in the absence of any possibility of recovery served only to prolong a state of existence without awareness or agency. On the other side, it was seen by some as a form of euthanasia, a deliberate ending of life, even if carried out through the withdrawal of support rather than direct intervention. The case, already complex due to its criminal elements, now became a focal point for discussions about medical ethics, legal authority, and the definition of life itself. Throughout this period, Maria remained at the center of these considerations, though she could not participate in them. Her condition was unchanged. She existed within a medical framework that sustained her body while her consciousness remained absent. On August 5, 2005, following the withdrawal of life support, Maria, Korp died. Her death marked the conclusion of the physical timeline that had begun on February 9th. It also had immediate legal implications. The case, which had initially been classified as attempted murder, now intersected with the reality of a fatal outcome. However, the legal processes already underway did not fully realign in a straightforward manner. Tanya Herman had already been convicted and sentenced under the original charges. Joe Korp, still awaiting trial, now faced a situation in which the victim's death could have influenced the nature of the proceedings against him. But before that process could reach its conclusion, another development occurred, one that brought a sudden and final shift to his involvement in the case. On the same day as Maria's funeral, Joe Korp died by suicide. The timing was immediate. He had arranged a separate funeral, distinct from the one held by Maria's family, and afterward, he returned home. There in the garage, he took his own life. His death occurred before he could stand trial, before the legal system could fully examine the evidence against him in a courtroom setting, and before any formal judgment of his role could be rendered. With his death, the legal proceedings against him came to an end. There would be no verdict, no sentencing, and no definitive legal conclusion regarding his level of responsibility. The case, in that respect, remained incomplete. What was left was a set of established facts, a convicted perpetrator in Tanya Herman, and an unresolved legal narrative surrounding Joe Korp. The outcome of the trial phase, therefore, was not a single, unified resolution, but a combination of conclusions and absences. Tanya Herman served a prison sentence for her role in the attack. Joe Korp never faced trial. Maria Korp, whose life had been the central focus of the case, died months after the initial incident. Her death shaped not only by the actions taken against her, but by the medical and legal decisions that followed. The courtroom, in this instance, provided only part of the answer. The rest remained defined by circumstances that extended beyond its reach. In the end, the Maria Korp case did not conclude with a single moment of resolution. It did not arrive at a clear and unified sense of closure, the kind that legal systems are often designed to provide. Instead, it fragmented into outcomes that, while final in their own ways, left behind a narrative defined as much by what could not be completed as by what was established. Maria Korp died on August 5, 2005, months after the initial attack that set everything in motion. Her death followed the withdrawal of life support, a decision made within a legal and medical framework that acknowledged the permanence of her condition. By that point, the physical damage caused by her confinement in the trunk of her car had already determined the limits of her survival. What followed was not recovery, but a prolonged state sustained artificially, one that extended the timeline of the case but did not alter its trajectory. Her death marked the end of that timeline, but did not simplify what had happened. It instead added another layer to it, one that intersected with questions of ethics, responsibility, and the meaning of intervention at the edge of life. For those who observe the case, the decision to withdraw life support became a focal point of debate. It was discussed in terms that extended beyond the specifics of Maria's situation, touching on broader issues about autonomy, medical authority, and the boundaries of humane action. Within the available facts, what can be said is that the decision was made because there was no expectation of recovery. It was not a reversal of the crime, nor an attempt to redefine it, but a recognition of its irreversible consequences. Even so, it altered the way the case was perceived. The timeline of Maria's suffering, already extended by the days she spent confined in the trunk, was now prolonged further by months in a state without awareness. That extension became part of the narrative, shaping how the case was understood and remembered. Parallel to this, the legal outcomes remained uneven. Tanya Herman, who had pleaded guilty to her role in the attack, served a prison sentence of 12 years. Her conviction established, in formal terms, the responsibility for the act of violence that initiated the chain of events. She later served more than 8 years before being released. Her trajectory through the legal system followed a defined path: arrest, admission of guilt, sentencing, and eventual release. It was in that sense the most complete portion of the legal response to the crime. Joe Korp's trajectory was different and ultimately incomplete. He denied involvement and awaited trial, a process that would have determined his legal responsibility through examination of evidence and argument. That process never reached its conclusion. On the day of Maria's funeral, he died by suicide in the garage of his home. The location carries a quiet, unsettling symmetry with the place where the initial attack had occurred. But beyond that observation, the facts remain limited. His death ended the legal proceedings against him. There was no trial, no verdict, no formal judgment rendered by a court. What remained was a set of investigative conclusions and an absence where legal resolution would have been. The reasons behind his decision to end his life are not definitively established within the available data. They are often discussed in terms of pressure, public scrutiny, or the possibility of internal conflict. But these remain interpretations rather than confirmed facts. What can be stated with certainty is that his death removed the possibility of a complete legal accounting. The case, therefore, exists in a state where one participant's role is legally defined, and another's is not, despite the investigative findings that linked both to the crime. This imbalance contributes to the lasting impact of the case. It resists neat categorization. It does not offer a singular conclusion that resolves all questions. Instead, it leaves behind a structure in which some elements are fixed and others remain open. Beyond the individuals directly involved, the case extends into broader themes that continue to resonate. One of these is the nature of violence within close relationships. The events that unfolded did not originate from a random encounter or an external threat. They emerged from within a family structure, shaped by a concealed relationship and a shared decision between two individuals to remove a third. This aspect of the case challenges assumptions about where danger originates. It underscores the reality that harm can develop in environments that outwardly appear stable, where routine and familiarity create a sense of security that is not always reflective of underlying dynamics. Another theme is the role of time in the experience of harm. The method used in this case, confinement within a car trunk, did not produce an immediate outcome. It extended the act of violence across hours and days, transforming it into a process rather than a single moment. That duration is central to the way the case is understood. It introduces a dimension of suffering that is not defined solely by the initial act, but by what followed it. Maria's survival for several days within that environment, followed by months in a vegetative state, creates a timeline in which the effects of the crime are prolonged and layered. It is not a single point of impact, but a sequence of conditions that unfold over time. The ethical questions surrounding the withdrawal of life support form another layer. These questions are not resolved by the case itself. They remain part of an ongoing discussion that extends beyond any single event. What the case provides is a context in which those questions become immediate and tangible. It presents a situation where medical reality, legal authority, and moral interpretation intersect, each offering a framework for understanding the same decision in different ways. For the purposes of the narrative, it is not necessary to resolve those perspectives, only to acknowledge that they exist and that they contributed to the public response to Maria's death. At its core, the case returns to a set of fundamental elements: a person, a sequence of actions taken against her, and the consequences that followed. Maria Korp's life, as described within the available facts, was defined by routine, family, and responsibility. That life was interrupted by an act of violence carried out in a space associated with normal daily activity. From that point forward, everything that followed, the confinement, the discovery, the medical condition, the legal proceedings, and the eventual outcomes was shaped by that initial act. In reflecting on the case, it is not the complexity of the legal process or the public debate that stands at the center, but the simplicity of what was done. A person was attacked, rendered unconscious, and placed in a confined space with the expectation that she would not survive. That expectation did not unfold in the way it was intended, but the result remained irreversible. The survival that followed did not lead to recovery, only to an extended period before death. The case does not require embellishment to convey its impact. Its facts are sufficient. A routine mourning that led to disappearance. A confined space that became the site of prolonged suffering. A discovery that came too late to prevent irreversible harm. A legal process that reached only partial completion. And a set of outcomes that, taken together, resist the idea of closure. In the end, what remains is not a single defining moment, but a sequence that continues to echo because of its duration, its proximity, and its consequences. Maria Korp did not vanish. She was taken, confined, and left behind. And for days, in a space never meant to hold a person, she remained there, alive, unseen, and waiting for an intervention that did not come in time. What remains after the conclusion of the Maria Korp case is not simply a record of events, but a structure that invites closer examination. The facts themselves are direct, an attack carried out in a private space. A victim left in a confined environment for days, a survival that did not lead to recovery, and a legal process that reached only a partial conclusion. But when these elements are viewed together, they reveal patterns that extend beyond the immediate case, patterns that speak to decision-making, opportunity, and the nature of harm within close relationships. One of the most significant aspects to examine is the role of planning. The available information establishes that the attack was not spontaneous. Tanya Herman waited in the garage, indicating that the timing of Maria's arrival had been anticipated. This detail alone differentiates the act from one driven by sudden escalation. Waiting requires foreknowledge. It requires an understanding of routine, of when a person will enter a specific space, and how long that window of opportunity will remain open. The method of attack, approaching from behind and using a strap or belt, further reinforces this. It is a method that depends on surprise and proximity, suggesting that the objective was immediate incapacitation rather than confrontation. This combination of waiting and method reflects a level of preparation that aligns with the broader conclusion that the act was planned. That planning did not end with the attack itself. The sequence that followed, placing Maria into the trunk, relocating the vehicle, and abandoning it, demonstrates continuity of intent. Each step required decision-making beyond the initial moment of violence. Moving a body, even an unconscious one, is not incidental. It requires effort, coordination, and a willingness to continue the act beyond its first stage. The decision to use the trunk as a means of confinement is particularly significant. It is not a location associated with immediate death, but with isolation. The outcome depends on time rather than instant effect. This introduces a different dimension to the act. It shifts it from a single event into a process, one in which the result is delayed but anticipated. From an analytical perspective, this raises questions about the nature of intent. The choice to confine rather than to kill immediately suggests an expectation that death would occur. Without further intervention, it removes the need for continued presence, allowing those responsible to distance themselves physically from the outcome while still having set in motion. This form of action relies on conditions rather than direct continuation. It reflects an understanding that the environment itself will carry out the final stage of the act. Within the framework of the case, this is one of the most defining characteristics. It is not only what was done, but how it was structured to unfold over time. Another element that emerges from analysis is the role of relationship dynamics in shaping motive. The existence of a long-term affair between Joe Korp and Tanya Herman provides a clear foundation for intent. It establishes a shared objective, the removal of Maria from the situation. Importantly, this objective was not held by a single individual acting in isolation. It was shared. This introduces the concept of mutual reinforcement. When two individuals align in their intent, the threshold for action can shift. Decisions that might not be taken independently can become more likely when supported or validated by another person. The data does not provide insight into the conversations or reasoning that led to this alignment, but it does establish that the alignment existed. From that point forward, the transition from intent to action becomes a matter of execution rather than justification. The asymmetry within the relationship structure is also significant. Maria was not part of this alignment. She was the subject of it. This imbalance meant that decisions affecting her life were made without her knowledge or input. In analytical terms, this removes the possibility of negotiation or resistance prior to the act. It places her entirely outside the decision-making process, despite being the central figure affected by it. This dynamic is critical in understanding how the event could occur without interruption. There was no confrontation that escalated into violence. There was a concealed plan that was enacted at a moment when Maria was alone and unprepared. The role of time, already evident in the method of confinement, extends into the broader narrative as well. The 4-day period between disappearance and discovery is not simply a gap in the timeline. It is an active component of the event. During this period, the outcome was being determined not through further action, but through the continuation of conditions that had already been established. This distinguishes the case from those in which the primary act and the outcome are closely linked in time. Here, the delay is central. It defines the experience of the victim, the nature of the harm, and the eventual medical consequences. From an analytical standpoint, time functions as both a mechanism and a factor of uncertainty. The expectation was that the conditions would lead to death. The fact that Maria survived those 4 days introduces an unintended variable. It altered the trajectory of the case, transforming it from an immediate fatal outcome into a prolonged medical and legal situation. This shift had significant implications. It allowed for the identification and arrest of those responsible while the victim was still alive. But it also introduced complexities in how the case was prosecuted. The distinction between attempted murder and murder, already noted in the legal proceedings, is directly tied to this element of survival. The medical dimension of the case further deepens its analytical complexity. Maria's condition following her discovery, severe brain damage, coma, and eventual vegetative state, was not an additional event, but a direct consequence of the initial act and the conditions that followed it. The lack of oxygen over an extended period is consistent with the environment of the trunk, and the resulting damage defines the remainder of the timeline. From an analytical perspective, this highlights the relationship between method and outcome. The chosen method did not produce immediate death, but it produced damage that was equally irreversible. The distinction lies not in severity, but in timing. This, in turn, influenced the ethical dimension of the case. The decision to withdraw life support did not arise independently. It was a response to the medical reality created by the initial act. Without that act, the decision would not have existed. This connection underscores the way in which the consequences of the crime extended beyond the moment of its execution into the months that followed. The legal outcomes, when examined analytically, reflect both resolution and limitation. Tanya Herman's guilty plea and subsequent sentence provide a clear example of accountability within the system. Her role was established, admitted, and addressed through sentencing. Joe Korp's case, however, represents the limits of that system. His death prior to trial prevented a formal determination of his legal responsibility. This creates a gap between investigative conclusion and judicial confirmation. From an analytical standpoint, this gap is significant because it illustrates how the legal process depends not only on evidence, but on the continuation of proceedings. When those proceedings are interrupted, the system cannot produce a complete outcome, regardless of the underlying facts. Finally, the case as a whole can be understood as an intersection of several key elements: planned action, relational motive, environmental method, and extended consequence. Each of these elements contributes to the overall structure of the event. None exist in isolation. The planning informs the method. The method shapes the outcome. The outcome influences the legal and ethical responses. And the relationships provide the context within which all of this occurs. In analyzing the case, it becomes clear that its impact does not derive from a single aspect, but from the way these elements combine. The violence itself is central, but it is the manner in which it was carried out, extended over time, and embedded within personal relationships that defines its lasting significance. The case does not require interpretation to be understood as severe. Its facts are sufficient. But through analysis, those facts reveal a structure that explains not only what happened, but how and why it unfolded in the way that it did.